When power flips, the day a cop stopped the wrong man. It was an unbearably hot day, the kind where the sun beat down on the city, turning the concrete streets into ovens. Heat shimmered in the air, and people moved slowly, seeking the refuge of shade wherever they could find it. The city was alive, buzzing with the sounds of horns blaring, distant sirens wailing, and people chattering as they went about their daily lives. On days like this, tempers flared quickly and patience wore thin. Officer Mark Holloway sat in his patrol car, watching the traffic crawl by, beads of sweat rolling down his temple despite the air conditioning. He had been on the force for over 10 years now, and while his early days were filled with the zeal of wanting to make a difference, those feelings had long since faded. The job had worn him down, and the darker parts of his character had emerged, parts he didn't like to admit existed. His prejudices, small at first, had grown with every shift. It wasn't something he was proud of, but it was a part of him now. He didn't even think about it anymore. His actions had become automatic. As he scanned the street, a sleek black car caught his eye. It was a luxury sedan, out of place in this neighborhood, a part of the city known for its struggles with crime and poverty. Holloway's eyes narrowed as he watched the car roll by slowly, its windows tinted just enough to obscure the driver's face. "What's a car like that doing in a place like this?" he muttered to himself. Without a second thought, he flicked on his lights and pulled out behind it. The car rolled to a stop on the side of the road, and Holloway could feel the tension rising in his chest. He didn't know why, but something about this situation felt off to him. He approached the driver's side window, hand resting on the holster of his gun, just in case. The window rolled down slowly, revealing a man in a crisp, tailored suit. His skin was dark, his expression calm, and his posture straight. There was something about him, an air of quiet confidence, as if he had nothing to prove to anyone. Holloway hated that. He was used to people squirming when he pulled them over, making excuses, trying to talk their way out of a ticket or worse. This man, though, just sat there, unbothered. "License and registration," Holloway barked, his voice harsher than it needed to be. The man met his gaze without flinching and reached slowly into the glove compartment for his paperwork. His movements were measured, deliberate, as if he knew exactly what Holloway was thinking and wanted to avoid any unnecessary escalation. "Is there a problem, officer?" the man asked, his voice smooth and steady. There was no hint of fear or anxiety in it, just a simple, polite inquiry. Holloway's jaw tightened. "You tell me, what are you doing in this neighborhood, driving a car like this?" It wasn't an official question, but Holloway had long since stopped caring about the line between professionalism and his own biases. The man in the suit raised an eyebrow but said nothing as he handed over his ID and registration. Holloway glanced at the documents, quickly scanning the name. David Harris. It didn't ring any bells, but something about the way the man was handling the situation bothered him. He wasn't intimidated. Holloway was used to holding all the power in these situations, but this man was acting as though he had nothing to fear. "Step out of the vehicle," Holloway ordered, his hand still on his gun. David's eyes flickered for a moment, but he didn't argue. He unbuckled his seatbelt and stepped out of the car, standing tall in the midday sun. Around them, the city moved on. A few passers-by slowed their steps to watch the scene unfold, sensing the tension. The air between the two men felt charged, heavy with unspoken words and intentions. Holloway could feel his frustration mounting. Why wasn't this man reacting the way he was supposed to? Why wasn't he sweating, stammering, or trying to explain himself? It was as if he was waiting for something, biding his time. "Hands on the car," Holloway said, his voice gruff. David turned slowly and placed his hands on the roof of the sedan, complying without a word. Holloway patted him down, more roughly than necessary, looking for anything that could give him an excuse to escalate this further. But there was nothing. No weapons, no drugs, no reason for this stop other than Holloway's own assumptions. And yet, he couldn't let it go. He had to prove something. To himself, to this man, to the people watching. He had to show that he was in control. "Is there something you're looking for, officer?" David asked calmly, his voice carrying just enough weight to cut through the tension. Holloway clenched his teeth. "Shut up," he snapped. "You don't get to ask the questions here." David turned his head slightly, just enough to catch Holloway's eye. Actually, I do. Holloway froze. The tone of David's voice had changed just slightly, but it was enough to make him pause. There was authority there, an edge that hadn't been present before. And then, before Holloway could react, David reached into his jacket pocket. "Hands where I can see them," Holloway shouted, his hand flying to his gun. But David didn't stop. He pulled something out of his pocket and held it up for Holloway to see. A badge. Not just any badge. The unmistakable emblem of internal affairs, the division tasked with investigating police misconduct. And the name on the badge? David Harris, head of internal affairs. Holloway's heart stopped. He stared at the badge, his mind racing to catch up with what was happening. The man he had been trying to intimidate, the man he had assumed was just another suspect, was his superior in the most terrifying way possible. For a moment, everything was silent. The crowd that had gathered was watching intently, sensing that something significant had just happened. Holloway could feel the weight of their eyes on him, but all he could focus on was the badge in David's hand. David turned to face him fully now, slipping the badge back into his jacket with a calm, deliberate motion. "I think we're done here," he said quietly, his voice carrying a gravity that left no room for argument. Holloway swallowed hard, the taste of fear rising in his throat. His mind raced as he tried to think of something, anything to say that could fix this. But there was nothing. He had made his bed, and now he had to lie in it. David took a step closer, his eyes locked onto Holloway's. "I've seen a lot of officers like you, Officer Holloway," he said, his voice low but steady. "Men who think that a badge gives them the right to treat people however they want. Men who think that authority means power, not responsibility." Holloway's mouth went dry. He wanted to argue, to defend himself, but he couldn't. He knew deep down that everything David was saying was true. "This isn't the first time you've acted like this, is it?" David continued. "Number, I can see it in your eyes. You've been doing this for years, haven't you? Stopping people because of how they look, where they're driving, what you assume about them." Holloway opened his mouth to protest, but David cut him off. "Save it. I'm not interested in excuses. I'm interested in accountability." The words hit Holloway like a punch to the gut. Accountability. It was the one thing he had always managed to avoid, hiding behind the blue wall, thinking he was untouchable. But now, standing in front of the man who could bring his entire career crashing down, he realized just how wrong he had been. David took a step back, letting the silence hang in the air for a moment before speaking again. "You're lucky, Officer Holloway. Today, I'm not going to ruin your career. Not because you don't deserve it, but because I want you to think about what just happened here. I want you to remember this moment the next time you decide to stop someone based on your assumptions." Holloway felt a wave of relief wash over him, but it was quickly followed by a deep, gnawing shame. He had been given a second chance, but it was clear that he had come dangerously close to losing everything. David turned and walked back to his car, his posture as composed and unbothered as it had been from the start. He got in, started the engine, and pulled away, leaving Holloway standing alone on the sidewalk. The crowd that had gathered slowly dispersed, and the city resumed its normal rhythm. But for Holloway, nothing would ever feel the same again. As he stood there, watching the car disappear into the distance, Holloway couldn't shake the feeling that he had just encountered a force far more powerful than he had ever imagined. Not the force of a gun, or a badge, or a uniform, but the force of accountability, of justice, of knowing that no one is above the law. For the first time in his career, Officer Mark Holloway felt small, and he knew deep down that this would not be the last time he would think about David Harris and the lesson he had learned that day. Because sometimes the people you least expect are the ones holding all the power. And they